It's the morning after the conclusion of the U.S. elections, and some are excited, some are nursing their wounds. We've seen reactions from both candidates, and we will be talking about the U.S. elections and exactly how it will concern or maybe impact Nigeria. Good morning and welcome to Breakfast Central. I am Olive MOD. And
I am Osaogi Ogbowan. Yes, welcome to Breakfast Central this Thursday morning. We plan to give you the next 2 hours of some of the big conversations happening here in Nigeria. And as always, we encourage you to join us via our social media platforms at News Central TV. Let us know your thoughts on any of the conversations that we're having. And if you're watching us on YouTube this morning, we say good morning to you as well. And please leave a comment. Yes, the United States elections are finally over. It had been building for years, eventually months and then weeks, and, eventually took place yesterday. Many people have drawn similarities with elections, or not similarity, comparisons rather, with elections that are held in Nigeria. And a few people have expressed, how maybe ashamed, that in 2024, Nigeria still has the quality of elections that it has. The United States, with its population, with the different, complexities that shoots around the elections over there, and the little details here and there, was able to pull off an election that was concluded by, later, on the same day that the election started. But of course, comparing that to what we have in Nigeria, I mean, there was no need to go to court. There was no ballot box snatching. There was no violence of any sort. There was no warning people to not come out to vote. There was no, irregularities with the electoral process, like we would, maybe see here with INEC and the likes. It was a pretty straightforward process. My argument has always been that the narrative that, they're a 200-year democracy and so they've made their mistakes, allowed Nigeria to make its mistakes, is completely deceitful, because Nigeria doesn't live in a bubble. We see other countries. We see other countries that we should, have as role models. There's many other examples that, have also gained independence about the same time with Nigeria, about 60 years, that, have developed way better than we have, both from infrastructure and their institutions and the ability to conduct free and fair elections. And so it's not a good enough excuse to say that, we are simply just, a little above 60 years old, so give us time to make our mistakes. But again, there's been a lot of comparisons between that election and what we have in Nigeria. And of course, as we look forward to what happens in 2027, I hope that we've learned enough lessons. I've also seen people mention that INEC must be reformed. Same thing with the Nigerian justice system must be reformed if we hope to have anything, the semblance of a free and fair election in 2027, elections that we'll be proud of, that we can trust. And, I think it's an important point to be made. Another thing to, quickly chip in is that we cannot not mention or identify how much damage has been done to Nigeria's institutions in the last 9 years by the Buhari administration, mostly by the Buhari administration, and how the justice system was greatly affected. The sanctity, the independence of that arm of government was greatly affected. Maybe they also have a fair share of the blame, Olive. But it is something that I saw when we started talking about the Water on Ogun case, when we started talking about the minors that were released as well, the complete damage that has been done to the institution of the judicial system in Nigeria, and how we must, as a country, start to take immediate steps to fix it, to giving it some credibility again, to fixing every single part of it that has been broken because of politics.
Well, you've said it all. There's really nothing more to add, but I'm sure that as we proceed with the show this morning, we'll still be looking at the U.S. elections and how exactly it impacts Nigeria and what it means that Donald Trump has won and will become the 47th president of the United States. Let's share with you what our top stories this morning are on Breakfast Central.
Now let's begin breakfast headlines with updates on the U.S. elections, where U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has called Donald Trump to congratulate him for winning the 2024 presidential elections. Now this was disclosed by one of her senior aides following a bitter and contentious race. Democrat Harris discussed with Trump the importance of a peaceful transfer of power and being a president for all Americans. Still on the U.S. elections, Donald Trump has delivered a victory speech at the Palm Beach County Convention Center in Florida as he emerged winner of the presidential election after beating Kamala Harris in a stunning White House comeback. In his address, he called for national unity, urging the American people to put the divisions of the past 4 years behind them. Away from the United States now, back to West Africa and Nigeria, where President Bola Tinubu has ordered the rescheduling of the Federal Executive Council meeting following the demise of Chief of Army Staff Lieutenant General Taoreed Lagbaja. The president noted that a new date for the meeting will be announced later. The FEC meeting was initially scheduled for yesterday, but had to be postponed in honor of the late Lagbaja, who passed away on Tuesday night. A group of 114 end-bad governance protesters, including 30 minors, arrived at the State House Auditorium in Abuja yesterday following an order for their release by President Bola Tinubu. The protesters were brought to the premises around 2 p.m. and were officially received by Vice President Kashim Shettima, who represented President Tinubu in handing them over to their respective state governors. In the meantime, the End Bad Governance movement in Lagos has urged President Tinubu to withdraw charges against all protesters currently detained or on trial, including Adaramoye Michael Lennon and 10 others whose trial for treason is scheduled to commence at the Federal High Court in Abuja on Friday. This call comes after the release of 114 detained protesters, including minors, on Tuesday, November 5th. The movement noted that the charges against those released and the 11 others still incarcerated are broadly similar, and as such, demands the release of all the remaining detainees and a public apology, amongst other demands. Still in the news, Nigerian maritime stakeholders have raised concerns on the many cargoes that are currently trapped at the Apapa and Tinkan ports following persistent disruption to online services of some commercial banks in Nigeria due to the upgrade of the electronic banking portals. Investigations confirmed that many import units of containers have not been cleared because their clearance documents are still trapped in some banks due to ongoing network migration issues. Away from Nigeria now, in the southern part of the continent, Mozambique's Defense Minister, Cristóvão Shume, has issued a stern warning that the military may intervene if post-election protests, which have turned deadly, continue across the country. Speaking at a press conference on Tuesday, Shume condemned the protest, stating that they're sowing division, spreading hatred, and destroying infrastructure. He described the demonstrations as part of an attempt to destabilize the Mozambican government. And that's all on Breakfast Headlines. Let's head back to Breakfast Central now and get into our top stories. I am Osaogie Ogbon.
As part of efforts to ease the tension and controversy surrounding the arraignment of over 100 protesters, many of them classified as minors, Nigeria's Vice President Kashim Shettima has handed over the detainees to their state governors. Our correspondent Idong Joseph has more on this.
Most of the protesters, many of whom are under 18, were linked to the End Bad Governance protest. They initially appeared before the Federal High Court in Abuja on charges bordering on treasonable felony and incitement, amongst others. Some of the protesters collapsed in court as images surfaced on the internet showing them looking hungry and malnourished after spending approximately 3 months in custody. These situations sparked widespread controversy and public outrage, leading to President Bola Tinubu to direct that all charges against them be dropped. At the presidential villa, Vice President Kashim Shettima welcomed the freed individuals and advised them not to allow themselves to be used to commit any form of crime.
Over 300 billion naira was lost in the protest, consisting mainly private property through looting and loss of business. I will urge you, I will advise you, you are our children. to use the opportunity of the President's magnanimous gesture in ensuring that you go back home and become responsible citizens.
He also urged the representatives from Kaduna and Kano states who were present to stand united against political or religious divides as they help reintegrate the individuals back into society.
I will urge our governors and our elected representatives here that cut across political divides. What binds us together as citizens of the Federal Republic of Nigeria surpasses whatever that divides us.
The governor of Kano State, Abba Yusuf, who spoke on behalf of the delegation, acknowledged the young protesters' lack of awareness and commended the government for granting them pardon. He also promised to ensure that such incidents do not occur again in both Kano and Kaduna states.
But what you did is treasonable, felony, punishable under the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Alhamdulillah, through this persistent appeal, through the compassionate demonstration by the President, you are now free. Your Excellency, extend our appreciation to Mr. President.
As over 100 of the freed individuals return home, their representatives have assured that they will facilitate their reintegration and enrollment back to schools. In Abuja for News Central, I am Idong Joseph.
I don't know if it's just me that feels embarrassed to see this sort of stories. You know, this should not be the stories that mark our democracy. You know, the fact, yes, there was uproar. Many would interpret it as the government listening to the uproar of Nigerians, but it should never have happened in the first place. And so I'm not really excited about it because I feel embarrassed that ours is an administration, or our government, or our democracy in 2024 is one that arrests minors, and then we're celebrating that these minors have been reunited with their family. And the worry is, what measures have been put in place to ensure that this does not occur again? How are we sure that tomorrow something will not happen, a minor will not be arrested, thrown into jail, kept for 3 months, and then brought before a federal high court judge, and that the judge will not sentence them to, you know, give them bail, stringent bail conditions such as 10 million naira?
I mean, so first of all, it probably is important to, you know, take a look across Nigerian prisons and see if there needs to be a cleanup, you know, of minors, those who are there waiting trial and the likes, you know, and all of that. But that is one angle. Another thing that is important to mention is, so it's pretty typical of, you know, this government and, you know, maybe the one before it, where they create a problem, fix the problem, then throw a party for fixing the problem that they, you know, created. I would strongly argue that all this fanfare, you know, I've always spoken against the fanfare with which we do things in Nigeria. There are things that should be done quietly and everybody goes home because it's part of your responsibility. You don't need to throw a party. So all this fanfare now for a thing that they should be ashamed of themselves. Every single person who played a part in what we are seeing there, where they are now celebrating and sewing new kaftans for them, should be ashamed of themselves. The judge who saw those faces and decided to sentence those kids to jail, or at least give them 10 million naira bail, that judge should be asked questions by the Nigerian Bar Association. Everybody who played a role should be asked very, very strong questions as to what exactly led to this embarrassment, that the children that you first of all failed to provide a life for, you arrest them for protesting, even if they were, a couple of them there were 13 years old and 15 years old and 11 years old, you know, whatever their ages were. You gave these people 10 million naira bail condition. These are people that don't have 10,000 naira. They probably haven't seen 10,000 naira in the last 6 months or in the whole of this year. You ask them to be bailed with 10 million naira. Is it these kids that were meant to overthrow the government?
Because they were waving flags. Because
they were waving flags, as terrible as that is. But is it these children? And I don't know if there's any part of law that gives the judge his own ability to discern, to make certain, to take a look at the case,
yes,
look at the people
absolutely.
who are affected and say,
absolutely.
okay, now this
the law does, make provision for that.
So the judge who then gave these people 10 million naira bail each
was lacking of empathy?
Completely. And that's why I started this morning by talking about how politics has destroyed our institutions greatly in Nigeria. Because people who should understand the sanctity of the roles that they have seemingly now started playing politics or, playing along with politicians. It's
why yesterday when we had the guests, I had asked the guests that on the different levels, who are the people that need to be checked and what bodies will check them? And, we talked about the police that did the arrest, the judge that gave these stringent bail conditions, and even the lawyer should have known better to advise his clients that what you're doing is illegal. It's not advisable to arraign a minor in a federal high court, to detain a minor for 3 months. So part of the conversation was about the National Judicial Council having a look at this and maybe, having to ask the judge a number of questions, because this is beyond disheartening. If you read the proceedings from the court that day, the defense counsel, that's the counsel to the minors, had asked the judge to discharge and acquit these minors. He said no, he was only going to discharge the 4 that collapsed to go and get better. And when they get better, they'll come back and continue their case. And for the rest of them, then he then gives them those stringent bail conditions. Like I said earlier, I feel embarrassed and ashamed that this is what our democracy, is. And this is where we are.
Yeah.
And the concern, again, like I mentioned, is what are the chances? Because what we've realized in Nigeria, when something happens and there isn't any dire consequence, the likelihood of it happening again is very high. And it then sets a pattern for how things are done. First time, that something happens, everybody is amazed, just like we are. Everybody's talking, there's a lot of chatter. Before you know, it becomes the norm. It starts happening on a regular, and it just goes into, I don't mind the government, that's how they do, this administration, and then it becomes a normal thing. So my worry is, will this ever reoccur? And will this be the norm? Will there be people who will be made to answer questions for this anomaly that has occurred to our justice system?
Yeah. And of course, the crime that they committed is protesting, by the way. Let's not forget that.
Which is a right enshrined in the Constitution for every Nigerian.
Yeah. Let's not, maybe interpret it as, these are people who maybe had gotten into armed robbery or kidnapping or had murdered somebody. The crime that these people committed is protesting.
Maybe their argument would be that the protesting was not peaceful. And assuming, but not conceding, that was actually what happened. Was this the way to go about it? Absolutely not. People should be made to answer questions.
But mostly we should, first of all, be ashamed of ourselves. And I believe that everybody who played a part in this thing should be reminded of the shame that they should feel for the last couple of weeks and this particular conversation that we're having, and for what those kids have had to go through, and that the judge was willing to let those kids remain in jail indefinitely until they provide that 10 million naira bail. Of course, none of them there has...
All of them put together may not even be able to produce 10 million naira.
Exactly. No, 10 million is a lot. 100,000. But the point is that the judge was willing to let these people go back to jail and be held, in prison until they provide that 10 million naira jail. And this is in a country that has laws, a country that is practicing democracy. And everybody who's feigning shock now that they didn't know should be ashamed of themselves as well. So the Kano State governor never knew that all these kids from Kano State were arrested and were being sent to prison. The Attorney General of Federation never knew all this while. Please, let's not forget that this thing wouldn't have gone viral if they didn't appear in court and these people fainted and then it made social media awareness.
I think so. It was two things. It was when the very dark man guy had posted about coming out of his cell and seeing them and seeing that he shared cells. Imagine putting children and adults in the same cell. Again, it's embarrassing, but kudos to the government for having reunited them.
No, but that's the key part, that this would not have gotten anywhere. In fact, we're not even talking about this now if there wasn't that social media awareness that was created on the day that they were in court. So the government, if not for that awareness, was willing to put these kids through that process and send them back to prison. The judge, the customs, it's custom now, the correctional center
yeah.
Officials, the Nigerian police was willing to send these kids to prison if not for that social media awareness. So that's why I said initially that they create a problem, then there is an outcry, then they solve the problem,
and then position
throw a party for themselves.
As a government that
they've solved the problem.
To the cry of the
they're a
people.
listening government. So now imagine how many more of such underage people are, languishing in prisons across Nigeria. A country that seemingly eats its kids.
Well, anyway, that's the update that we have regarding the young protesters who were detained and have now been released. We will move the conversation away from Nigeria, where this particular action has affected or has made a number of Nigerians question what kind of democracy we're running, to another country that has positioned itself as the forefront of, or the forerunners of democracy. I'm talking about America in this case. The American people have voted, and Donald Trump and J.D. Vance will be the next president and vice president, the 47th president of the United States. Donald Trump has been elected, and he's been elected for a second term, nearly 4 years after leaving office, with projections showing the Republican comfortably winning the 270 electoral votes, which is the threshold required to win the White House. His Democratic rival, Vice President Kamala Harris, has called him to congratulate him. She stated in a speech that she will help him with the transition and engage in a peaceful transfer of power. The president-elect will be sworn in on January 20th, 2025. We'll be looking at this very shortly with our guest, but just to mention that it's been mixed reactions, of course. There are a number of people who are very excited about Donald Trump's win. There are a number of others who are not very excited about it. There are clips of the Kamala Harris supporters, particularly a lot of women who seem to have been showing a lot of emotion, crying. There's been conversations about how this might have been some measure of misogyny thrown into the mix. There have been those who would say that, Trump has expressed in his acceptance speech, has said that he will use his last breath to fight for the freedom and, the betterment of the American people. He will keep fighting for them. But I think a number of things that people were surprised about would be that states that are typically Democrat states, the states that would typically be for them, the blue states, how Trump successfully trumped Kamala in these states. I think those are a number of the questions that people were asking. But the arguments we've seen would be those who say that Trump was more detailed and clear about his plan than maybe Kamala was. Some are against it. But, I mean, it's an argument that I don't think we'll be hearing the end of anytime soon, especially as we count up to the elections he's swearing in January. His his media team have already given a speech as to what exactly to expect from day one. Part of it would be undocumented immigrants that will be sent away from the United States. So we've been seeing a number of people mocking those who voted Trump, saying, better tell your cousins, Trump is going to kick you out. So those are some of the reactions that we've seen regarding the U.S. elections.
Yeah. First of all, he has been president before.
Yes.
It's not like this is the first time that the world is going to be experiencing, or America is going to be experiencing Donald Trump. He's been president before. Barack Obama, the savior of the black people of the whole world and beyond, deported more people than Donald Trump did. Way more people than Donald Trump did. It's not even up for debate. It's clear that he deported more people, but nobody talks about it. Because it is easier to demonize Donald Trump than it is to demonize
There was
Barack
a lot
Obama.
of criticism about Barack Obama yesterday. A number of people were saying that finally they feel that they're free from the shackles of Barack Obama, who has, quote-unquote, positioned himself as a godfather in America.
Yes. So there's that part. I just wanted to clarify that part. And then for the swing states, and the states that, normally people maybe expected would vote Democrat, that eventually voted for Donald Trump. There's a thing when people bring up this argument, about how, maybe Donald Trump's message, and misogyny and whatnot, is the reason that people choose him, but they don't like women. Many people just ignore the fact that maybe the Democrats actually have failed in the last 4 years. It's not a big deal to agree that maybe they have actually failed. You don't have to like Donald Trump to accept that they failed in the last 4 years, and failed with the things that the average American wants and the rest of the world that is affected by America's policies. They failed with immigration. They failed with the economy. They failed with foreign policy. The average American and the things that would make them vote for the Democrats. Listen, I think that this also is the election that has the most black voters voting for Donald Trump as well. And normally you would expect that the black community in America is fully for the Democrats. In fact, that was the blackmail that they tried to sell by bringing out Beyonce and Cardi B and LeBron James and everybody. Avengers, even all the Avengers, made a video saying they're voting for Kamala Harris. That was what they were trying to sell, and what they've always tried to sell. That's what Barack Obama was also hoping that would happen when he was trying to blackmail black men as well. Are you going to vote for you? Because the Democratic Party believes that they own the black community. But they forget that these people also have functional brains, and they can tell that the America of today is way worse than it was after Donald Trump's first tenure. And so you should give them the authority to make that decision, that what they're experiencing today is worse than when Donald Trump left office. And so if they would like to have a different person in office, then it's within their rights to. You cannot continue to blackmail people into repeatedly voting for you, and you're not improving their lives. I have continuously spoken about foreign policy, and the one that concerns me, I don't particularly have any interest with immigration, maybe not now until I'm ready to, if I decide to go to America and they send me back, I don't know. But I don't have, my particular problem is foreign policy and stopping and ending the wars that are currently going on across the world.
I was starting to see that looks like it might be in effect in terms of Russia, Ukraine. We've seen Putin. It would seem that Putin is maybe open to having communication regarding this. There might be. It looks like there might be peace. And
Donald Trump can get in and make it worse. Oh, I mean, that's unfortunate. But in the interim, who has created the most crisis in the last 4 years? It is the Democratic Party. It is Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. It is the fact that when the Russia-Ukraine war started, they had many opportunities with which they could end that crisis. But they didn't. Instead, they kept funding it while Americans were hungry at home and looking for the assistance that they needed. They kept sending money to Ukraine. And then the October 7th incident happened, or attack happened. And then, of course, they then started sending money to Israel while Americans are begging for help back at home. Look at the amount of lives that have been lost in the last 4 years simply because of the United States foreign policy and their support for these wars. I never knew the Democratic Party would have so many warmongers within it. The Victoria Newlands of the world and the Hillary Clintons of this world. And for me, that is what concerns me, the fact that I want a world that has less wars and less crisis. And Donald Trump's time, yes, I said this yesterday, that he did assassinate Soleimani, the Iranian general, which was a very, very strong or very, very difficult time. Everybody thought that Iran was going to retaliate and it was going to be World War III, but that didn't happen. Mostly, I believe, because of the restraint that the Iranians held. But aside that, there was almost no other crisis. He met with Putin. He met with the North Korean president, Kim Jong-un. In any way that he could negotiate and he could create peace, he did. And so this whole narrative of, well, he's going to be worse. Okay. But there's no way that I personally would not hold Kamala Harris and Joe Biden accountable for the ones that they've done.
Does it count that Kamala Harris, and we know that not just in the United States, even in Nigeria, a number of times, the role of the vice president is seen as figurehead.
Nobody was cutting Osinbajo any slack at the end of Buhari's term.
Well, there were these arguments that were brought up for Osinbajo as well, where people said that there's only so much he could do as vice president.
And that is not true. Because as vice president, you still have the ability to influence your number one, your OGA, or whatever it is.
You can be influencing your boss, your president, but I think it's almost impossible to come out to be seen, even if your boss is maybe not taking policies you're in support of, to come and to be seen as overtly going against the policies of your boss.
But
in Nigeria, for example.
That's in Nigeria. Over there, it's not the same thing. And it doesn't also mean that you cannot at least say something different. All through the campaign, when she was asked about how she's going to do, how she's going to be different from Joe Biden, she couldn't say anything. Okay. I think there's a part that we're also completely ignoring, the fact that Kamala Harris ran a campaign that carried nothing. There was nothing tangible. There was none of her interviews. There was nothing that she attended, no speech that she gave that was able to convince anybody to swing blue. There was absolutely nothing. The critical question that was asked multiple times, how are you going to be different from Joe Biden? She goes back to talking about how she's from a middle-class family and talks, about how she and Joe Biden, work hand in hand. And so she's almost no different. Let's also not forget, she is not president. The person who is president has been on holiday for the last couple of months since he stepped out of, the race for president, Joe Biden. She is talking about handing over now, and we're completely forgetting that America actually does have a president, which is Joe Biden. The Democrats successfully shielded him, covered, every type of criticism against him, lied to you repeatedly that he was in his best health. He was the strongest man. He was sharp as a tack, or whatever words that they were using. He was the finest person to challenge Donald Trump. Even when they knew and everybody's eyes could see, and that's one of the biggest problems, these people have been lying. You can see that Joe Biden is falling apart. His brain is almost not working perfectly. But they tell you every day that he is strong. In fact, he is active. Same way that somebody said that a particular president doesn't sleep at night, sleeps very late. He's always working. If you remember that president. But they kept lying that Joe Biden is the strongest candidate. He's ready to challenge Donald Trump for the next 4 years until he eventually crumbled. All they wanted to do was look for a way to lie their way and pull him and drag him over the finish line. But that didn't work because, of course, the disaster that debate was. And so my point here is these people have been lying non-stop.
Okay.
And it's not saying that Donald Trump's not a liar, but these particular ones should not act like, oh, you're so unfair, or we shouldn't have lost.
So yes, let's look at some of the policies, 7 things. Let's look at some things that Trump has said that he will do as president, and one of them is deport undocumented migrants. I think that's the one that has been, a number of people have been talking about the most. He's also pledged to complete the building of a wall at the border with Mexico that was started during his first presidency. Experts have mentioned that deportations on the scale promised by Trump would face huge legal and logistical challenges and could slow economic growth. Another thing he's talked about is the moves on economic tax and tariffs. He has promised to end inflation, which rose to high levels under President Joe Biden before falling again. But a president's power to directly influence prices, we know that is limited. It's not something that you can snap. I mean, just like here in Nigeria, President Tinubu cannot just come and say, let the inflation cease, and it will automatically cease. There are policies that need to be put in place. He's talked about overhauling sweeping tax cuts as well. But let's move on to the third one. He's talked about cutting climate regulations. During his first time, he rolled back hundreds of environmental protections and made America the first country to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. He's pledged to increase production of U.S. fossil fuels, vowing to drill on day one. You've been hearing about drill, baby, drill, in favor of renewable energy sources, talking about wind power. He wants to open areas such as the Arctic wilderness to oil drilling. He's also talked about ending the Ukraine war, which is another thing that has made a large conversation. He's pledged to end related violence in Lebanon. Hasn't really spoken about how he intends to do this, but he has also not said what he thinks on either side, being Russia and Ukraine should give up for the war to come to an end. But yes, that's something that he's looking to do. He's criticized the U.S. support in terms of monetary support that they have given to Ukraine in the war with Russia. There's also the pardon of some January 6 rioters. He said he will free some of those convicted of offenses during the riot in Washington, D.C. on 6th of January 2021 when his supporters stormed the Capitol building in an effort to thwart the 2020 election victory of Joe Biden. Several deaths were blamed on this violence, which he was accused of inciting. He's also said that he will sack Special Counsel Jack Smith. He said within 2 seconds of taking the office that the veteran prosecutor leading 2 criminal investigations against him will be sacked. He has indicted, Special Counsel Jack Smith has indicted Trump over alleged efforts to overturn the 2020 election and over his alleged mishandling of classified documents. Trump, of course, denies any wrongdoing and managed to prevent either case coming to trial before the election. And there's also the conversation about no abortion ban. Trump has said during the presidential debate with Kamala Harris that he will not sign into law a national abortion ban. In 2022, the nationwide constitutional right to abortion was overturned by the Supreme Court, which had a majority of conservative judges following Trump's first presidency. Reproductive rights became a key campaigning topic for Harris, and several states approved measures to protect or expand abortion rights on polling day. Trump himself has regularly said states should be free to decide their own laws, but struggled to find a consistent message of his own, some would argue. But these are some of the things that he has said. And, you know, we've also tried to look at the way in which the election would affect Nigeria. And we've highlighted a number of times as they're the nation that is like they're considered the free world. You know, we've seen that majority of the concerns that Nigerians have expressed, even within the past 24 hours, will be immigration concerns. I think that takes the lead of majority of the concerns that have been expressed back here by Nigerians. There are those who have started to put tweets about, make sure you renew your American visa before 20th of January. Is it 20th of January? I think that's when the swearing-in is occurring. But there are those who have started to ask people to go and renew, and others are saying, why you fear-mongering? It's not really that deep. Yeah. So long as you're not illegal, you have no problem with Trump. It is illegal migrants that should be worried, right? So, again, there's also presidential candidate Peter Obi has congratulated Donald Trump. There are those who never quite forgave Kamala Harris for her association with the Nigerian government. You know, there was a tweet she put out about congratulating the Nigerian government, and there are many people who never forgave her. So as soon as the results were announced, people started to dig up the tweet and say, gotcha. It would seem that people never really forgot about that tweet that she put out there. And, you know, they're wondering what the alliance would be for the current administration with the United States, what they have to offer in terms of, I mean, we know how these things usually play out. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, through his media assistants, would give out a congratulatory message, and before you know, there'll be a trip maybe made to personally congratulate him or to be a part of the
That's only normal.
You know, those are the normal things. But, you know, one is wondering, a number of Nigerians have started to wonder what the next steps are. And much later today, we'll be looking at how they've drawn parallels with Donald Trump and Peter Obi, the presidential candidate of the Labour Party, and arguably, you know, one who rose out of the, well, not ashes, but he was someone who Nigerians did not see coming.
Didn't expect.
Yes, Nigerians didn't expect
pretty
him
much the same
coming.
thing with Donald Trump, you know.
Exactly. They've seen both of them as, in a way, maybe I would use the word outliers loosely. Yeah. So they were the people that no one saw coming. I mean, Donald Trump is somebody who clearly has a number of cases against him. You know, some would say his track record, his criminal track record is in the cleanest, but yet here we are today. Yeah,
you know, but I mean, there's a part of it, you know, I think when I started, you know, I was talking about how, you know, we should not ignore the fact that Americans themselves would look at the last 4 years and be able to tell if their lives are better or not. You know, they have the ability to judge, you know, for themselves who would be better candidates and if the current people have done well enough. The propaganda can be sold, but it doesn't mean that everybody is buying it. Mm-hmm. And that's what the Democrats have failed to realize, that, you know, not everybody's buying propaganda. It's pretty much the same thing with everybody, you know, who is in the United States seeing these cases against Donald Trump. There's many people who believe that these are politically motivated, you know, and whatnot, you know. And so you might sell that propaganda and sell it through the, you know, major media platforms, but don't believe that everybody buys it. You know, people can see through your lies every now and then. But anyway, we'll go on a short break. When we come back, Breakfast Central continues this Thursday morning. Stay with us. Welcome once again to Breakfast Central, and now for a very quick conversation on the United States elections and the little details here and there. We're joined by Global Affairs analyst David Masanga. Good morning. Thanks for joining us, sir. Good morning, Mr. Masanga.
Yes, good morning. Good morning.
Good to have you.
Good morning, Africa. Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you clearly. Quickly, let's quickly get your thoughts on the.
I'm sorry about this.
Okay. Can you hear us clearly now?
Hear you. I'm in a place where the network is not good. So.
Okay. Well, I think if we can reconnect, then we probably would be able to have that connection. I think, you know, the connection is not very strong. So we'll have to reconnect with you, David Masanga. Stay with us. Let's move away from the United States now, go to the UK. The name Kemi Badenoch has been on the lips of many Nigerians and the black community in the UK. Recently, it was also on the lips of the chairman and CEO of the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, Abike Dabiri-Erewa, who says that the Nigerian-born, newly elected UK Conservative Party leader has failed to reciprocate in responding to NIDCOM's invitation to embrace her roots. Prior to that, Badenoch has faced backlash ever since she became the first black female leader, the first any British political party, or the first rather of any British political party, replacing Rishi Sunak as the chief of the British Conservative Party.
The backlash stems from the reality that during her campaign in 2010, Badenoch played the trump card of being a Nigerian and of African descent, calling for support from fellow Nigerians in the UK while speaking in one voice. She spoke highly, albeit partially, about the place she grew up before leaving for the UK at 16 years of age. Today, Badenoch wants nothing to do with Nigeria, it seems. She barely speaks good about the motherland, some would say. She says, and we quote, she doesn't want the UK to be like the place where she came from. Her rhetorics have become an anti-multiculturalism, as she believes that not all cultures and diversity are important, according to the perception of some who have seen the clips and have interpreted it as such. Let's take a look at the clip of her speaking.
It is our job to make sure that the people who come into the country are people who love this country, who want it to succeed. And I want this country's culture to stay the same. I left another country and came here because I thought it was better. I don't want this place to turn into the place that I was running away from. And I saw firsthand what happens when politicians are in it for themselves, when they use public money as their private piggy banks, when they promise the earth and pollute not just the air but the whole political atmosphere with their failure to serve.
One of the Nigerians that have found this very offensive and has returned or retaliated with an even more offensive tweet is Kemi Badenoch, who's used derogatory language to address Kemi Badenoch. I wish we had the tweet here. I don't know if our producer has the tweet, and if we do, we'll project it shortly. But the backlash that she's gotten, a number of people will ask, why is she getting that much backlash? Is it not within her right? Just as Abike Dabiri has said, is it not within her right to choose whether or not to identify with Nigeria? Now, this is a woman who, according to the reports we're seeing, she wasn't born in Nigeria. Yes, she came back to live in Nigeria at a young age, spent her early years in Nigeria and left back to the UK. What she was saying in the second clip we played about politicians doing things for their selfish gain, where is the lie? What has she said that is in that clip, for example, there is an outright lie? If she has chosen to now identify with England, then she has the right to. We find that what we're keen on doing, in Nigeria here is people go outside, make a name for themselves, and we're very, very quick to be excited about associating ourselves with them. They have a right to choose whether or not to associate themselves with us. If we had created an enabling environment, she would have been able to thrive here in Nigeria, and we wouldn't then be looking for the affiliation. Just to mention that it wasn't a situation of Abike Dabiri was saying, coming out to outrightly badmouth her, because I watched the clip. A question was asked if her office, NIDCOM, has reached out to Kemi Badenoch, or if Kemi Badenoch is, aligning herself with Nigeria, something in that regard. And it was her response that has now generated this conversation. But let's take a look at Kemi Badenoch's tweet regarding this subject matter. Can we please have the producers project it? It says, a very stupid little girl and notoriously self-righteous, I can't use that word, barks. Ever considered staying in the place you ran away from and trying to fix it? You are worse than Auntie Jemima, the female version of Uncle Tom. By all means, try your luck at being elected leader of the British Conservative Party, but leave my country out of your pretty yet stinking mouth. Very inappropriate tweet, inappropriate comment there. It wasn't necessary. These people who are bad-mouthing her and are upset at her, the people that have the slightest illness that will travel abroad to get medical care. They will go to the same UK to get medical care. When it's holiday, they and their families will travel to the same UK. So what is the difference between what you're doing and what Kemi is doing? She has a right to choose where she wants to align herself with. We've seen a number of Nigerian athletes who have not been treated well. They're not given the same attention that they would have been given if they were in other countries. Then they go to other countries, and then we start to badmouth them for representing the other countries. Let's do better at home. When we do better at home as Nigerians, we will not need to start sulking up to Nigerians who are the diaspora and begging them to align themselves with us, because we'll be sure that what we have is something that can match whatever quality of life they're being offered abroad. I rest my case.
Yeah, I mean, I still don't get what the controversy, really is about. I'm not sure if NIDCOM is hoping that previously Kemi Badenoch, which is her proper Nigerian name before getting married into the Badenoch name. I'm not sure if NIDCOM is expecting that Kemi Badenoch will be able to maybe influence policies that will favor Nigerians or something, of that sort. I'm guessing that is, what this relationship building is about, or at least influence policies that will favor Nigerians in diaspora in the UK in particular. Maybe not. But I don't also expect that she will be different from what the Conservative Party has to offer. She obviously has taken a stance and, she identifies more with the UK. Says she doesn't want to return to where she's coming from or want the UK to look like where she is coming from, and of course, describe Nigeria in maybe not the very best terms. Talked about corruption, talked about, robbery at night and how people used to be scared. I remember she told a story. So she didn't necessarily lie. I think it's a lot of Nigerians are really just, sensitive, with those parts of them being told or the country being painted that way. Because many people would argue that that's not, the only thing that goes on in Nigeria. Nigeria is not just that country that is fully corrupt and has armed robberies going on every night and all of that. Maybe in the 90s, maybe, you can say that that's what it was. And that maybe she should have represented her country a different way, or her home country a different way, or in a better way than the way that she described it. But she has chosen, that's how she wants to represent Nigeria and how she wants to portray Nigeria. She is, of course, going to be representing the Conservative Party in the UK, and she's repeatedly said it, that she's speaking for the British people and she wants what is best for the British people. I don't know, again, if NIDCOM is expecting that there would be the possibility of influencing policies that affect Nigerians.
Well, I mean, that may be an angle, but I don't necessarily think that might be it. I just think it's a thing of how when we see Nigerians that are thriving in other countries, we want to celebrate them, want to associate ourselves with them and say, yes, and the truth is, you put any Nigerian in a country and they will thrive. We are the most resilient, and I'm not saying this because I'm Nigerian, but one of the most resilient and the most dogged people, in the world. I would say that because we have so many challenges bedeviling our country. Yet, when you put Nigerians with, if you look at the current realities of what Nigerians have been experiencing, which has gotten progressively worse over times. Yet we see that Nigerians go to the UK, to the US, they're thriving in politics, in tech. Nigerians are really gifted and talented people. So I would think that why that is being asked is because NIDCOM wants to celebrate these Nigerians who have gone to other countries and have done well. But let's create an enabling environment for them to also be able to thrive here in Nigeria and to support them. I think she also made reference to Kemi Badenoch of Nigerian origin, who had an issue with the in South Africa and then reached out, and then Nigeria welcomed her with open arms and been able to build a relationship, and she's gone ahead to represent Nigeria at the Miss Universe competition. At the end of the day, as a Nigerian, we have so many challenges. I'm proud to be a Nigerian. I'm proud of my country. I'm glad to be Nigerian. I do wish that there were a number of things that were different with our country. But like those of us who are here, we would say that we're not going to throw away the baby and the bathwater. There's still things that are good about Nigerians. It's not necessarily just about the country as a whole. It's the people, our doggedness, our creativity, our ability to thrive in situations that would maybe try to pull us down and other people, and I would like to, as a Nigerian, I would probably be more inclined to celebrate that, whilst also holding the government to account and holding citizens to a better standard of life. But she can choose which country before now we could say she's as much British as she is Nigerian and has the right to choose which one she wants to represent. But we're hoping that going forward, this might be a teachable situation, and for now, it would seem that Nigerians don't want her to mention anything concerning Nigeria, especially in a negative light. But let us know what your thoughts are regarding that, and if you think that she's much ado about nothing, or that she probably has acted out of order. Yeah,
I just want to once again say that I believe that she has made it clear that she is fully representing the Conservative Party and the people and the British people. Nothing concerns her with Lagos and Abuja or anything. It is none of her. She has zero interest in any of those parts of her life or her upbringing or her childhood. She's focused on the Conservative Party because if eventually she fails as the leader of the Conservative Party, she will be dragged and she would be, called out as the leader of the Conservative Party, not as a Lagosian or not as, Yoruba girl or anything. She's going to be completely, called out that way. So we should let her focus on what she wants to focus on, which is the Conservative Party and, of course, the British people. I really don't see why there's controversy, but I get it. If
I understand the sensitivity.
It's fine. Yes. Like I said, I don't expect that she would, maybe influence any policies that will be more favorable to Nigerians.
Or maybe she will, right? Or maybe she will. But I think that this is a reality check for us to come back home and figure out the ways to make Nigeria a country where more young people would be willing to stay, to build, and to also see more young women who will be willing to participate in politics and be given a chance to lead parties here in Nigeria. But let's wrap the conversation up here. Let us know what your thoughts are at News Central TV, or you can tweet at us individually. Let's bring you through a recap of the conversations we've had and share with you what's coming up next. We won't force Kemi Badenoch to embrace our route, NIDCOM boss says. We have talked about this. We also want to find out what your thoughts are. Donald Trump defeats Harris, wins U.S. 2024 presidency, and there have been a number of reactions regarding this as well. Vice President Shettima calls for support for freed minors, and we did share a clip of that earlier. Now let's share with you what's coming up next.
Federal government blames discos for frequent electricity grid collapse. And also the newspaper front pages, the major stories making headlines across Nigeria this morning.
Welcome back to Breakfast Central, and if you're just joining us, a number of conversations have been had so far, but you can catch up with some of these conversations via our live stream. We're going to be also looking at the papers this morning and maybe opening the phone lines for you to join us, but we have analyst here with us, Tayo Akintobi. Thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure to be here.
It's good to have you. Let's start with This Nigerian newspaper, and on the front page of This Nigeria, hello, I'm back. I hope I said it in my most Donald Trumpish voice. With his decisive victory, Trump becomes the second defeated president in U.S. history to win a fresh White House term, 132 years after Grover Cleveland achieved defeat. Donald Trump shocks the world, returns to the Oval Office after knocking out Kamala Harris. World leaders, including Tinubu, his counterparts in Mexico, Ukraine, Egypt, Canada, and the UK felicitate him. Discos raise meter prices second time in 4 months. Let the poor breathe. Lagbaja, sad end of Chief of Army Staff. President Akpabio, others mourn. And that's all on This Nigerian newspaper. Let's head to our next paper.
Yeah. All right, away from This Nigeria, let's go to the Daily Independent. It says here, tributes for Lagbaja's Tinubu orders flags flown at half-mast. Akpabio, Oluremi Tinubu, Defense Minister Oyebanji, and others mourn. We can also find here, Tinubu and world leaders congratulate Trump on election victory as Harris concedes defeat. Monopoly in oil and gas sector, recipe for disaster. Oil marketers tell court. Obasanjo, Jonathan Tambuwal, Igbenedion, and others celebrate Obasanjo's achievements and impact in 8 years. I'm looking for just the relevant ones. Now, my predecessor, Lagbaja, was courageous and thoroughbred professional, says the acting Chief of Army Staff, Oloyede. I think those are the stories that we can take from the Daily Independent. Let's move to our next paper this morning.
All right, on our next paper, the Punch newspaper says, we were starved, locked up with criminals, according to the minors. Police deny maltreatment as released protesters narrate 3-month ordeal behind bars. Consumers protest as discos hike meter price by 28%. I'm sure that my stage group will have sent updates by now. Lagos sanctions Julius Berger over engineer's death on site. Lagos-Calabar Highway, property owners reject 18 billion naira compensation. World leaders salute Trump as president-elect vows to end illegal migration. Tinubu eyes cordial U.S.-Africa relations. Harris concedes rates. Diplomats list expectations. Marketers sue Dangote, insist on petrol imports. Banks free to trade with deposited FX, says CBN. Tinubu governors, CDS, others mourn Lagbaja. Police train personnel to tackle election violence. INEC tests beavers at mock accreditation. Let's begin with the big story there. Well, hello, I'm back, Donald Trump says 4 years later in a keenly contested, somewhat bitter election. We've seen Donald Trump emerge as the 47th president of the United States. Your thoughts on the election process?
The American people have spoken. I mean, in the run-up to the election, up until the very last day, we kept hearing how razor thin the margins were and how close and neck. But at the end of the day, it turned out to be a blowout, which means that polls should not be given as much credibility.
From social media.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, you don't really know what's in the heart of any voter, because when they get inside that polling booth, it's just the voter and his conscience. And it's not necessarily what he will tell you when he comes out of the polling unit. But at the end of the day, I think what made the difference in the election is that Trump was speaking to the minds of rural America, which is really where the population really is. We look at America and we think, it's like thinking all of Nigeria is Lagos, Abuja, and Port Harcourt. It doesn't work that way. You notice Kamala Harris won the major conurbations, Los Angeles, California, New York, Illinois, the big cosmopolitan areas where they're educated people, they're the elite, they're the wealthy. Those are the ones who voted for the Democratic Party. But core America lives in the suburbs, the rural areas. They're the ones that call the country bumpkins. Sometimes they call them skinheads. Sometimes they call them rural, up-country, farm-type people. That's where the real hardcore population is. And Trump spoke the language they wanted to hear. Two key things: the economy and immigration. Those two factors were really key to rural America, and I think that's really what made the difference. I think Kamala was at a bit of a disadvantage. She came in 107 days to the election. She was an accidental candidate. She wasn't planned for the role because Biden had indicated that he was going to contest for a second term. And so she wasn't adequately prepared. She hadn't been groomed over the last 4 years. If she had been the heir apparent during her tenure as vice president, they would have been giving her some assignments and putting her in the limelight and making sure that she had a legacy in the hearts and minds of the people. But because she came in at the last minute, she didn't really have a platform per se. If you're to think back, what can you really identify Kamala with? What groundbreaking policy, legislation, initiative, what even philosophy, political philosophy, can you identify her with? She was only able to say on the campaign trail that she will toe her principles line. Now, her principle to the rest of America hasn't performed really well. They're not happy with the Biden administration. And here she is. It's kind of akin to President Tinubu saying, I will follow from where Buhari
which
left
he did.
off. Which he did, and which didn't sit well with a lot of Nigerians because we believe Buhari didn't do very well. So somebody who's coming in saying, I will continue from where he left off means he's going to, inflict more hardship on us. So that was the same thing that happened with Harris, was that she didn't really have anything to point to that could be a galvanizing rod that the people could hold on to and say, this is what we expect if she comes in. So I think that worked to her disadvantage.
Oh, well, I mean, I had pretty much the same argument earlier. I don't think there's much that needs to be added.
I think another area to add is how this impacts Nigeria, because that's one of the things that we've seen. A number of Nigerians who were not even as invested in Nigerian politics have been invested in the American politics. So you may speak to some of the ways you think that this impacts Nigeria and why Nigerians are disinvolved.
Well, let's look at the history of the two parties to begin with. Nigerians typically have leaned more in the direction of the Conservative Party, which is the Republican Party, because they're Bible-thumping, God-believing moralists, the Republican Party. So they go against things like abortion. They go against things like same-sex marriage, which the Democratic left-wing liberals have always pushed. I mean, the same-sex marriage was signed by Obama, for crying out loud, right? So because Nigeria is a very religious country, our values have dovetailed more with the conservative movement in America. And as a result, you find people believing in things like prayer in schools, for example, the Democratic Party, the liberal left, have been saying it's against my child's right for him to be subjected to the Lord's Prayer at assembly in school in the morning, that you can't force religion down my child's throat. And
same thing with the gender issues, forcing down,
absolutely
on children.
And so I think that Nigerians generally have leaned more in we're a conservative set of people in terms of our values and principles. So how does this election more or less affect Nigeria? Because at the end of the day, that to me was the major concern, was which of these two candidates will work well for Nigeria? Look, for example, in Bill Clinton's time, he passed something called the Africa Growth Opportunity Act, which liberalized our ability to export our products for sale to the United States. Now, that's groundbreaking legislation that worked to our advantage because there were tariffs that were lowered. The barriers to trade were lowered for African countries, including Nigeria, under Bill Clinton. So I now ask myself that when Trump was in office the first time, what did he do that was to Nigeria's advantage? The one thing that comes to mind, I just heard it like 3 days ago when President Buhari was interviewed. He said when he sat down with President Trump, Trump asked him, why are you killing Christians in Nigeria? Point blank, looked him face straight dead eye in the eye and said, why are Christians being persecuted in your country? At the end of the day, in spite of everything that's said about Donald Trump and all the negative rhetoric that's thrown at him, he's actually very, very grounded in Christianity and religion, and he wears it on his lapel. He doesn't hide it. So for him to have taken President Buhari up on the fact that Christians were being persecuted in this country, President Buhari said he was taken aback. He had to stammer a little bit and say, well, it's not Nigerians that are being targeted. And Trump had his facts. He says, no, in Benue State, they're bombing churches and they're taking Christians out and they're shooting them. No, your country is persecuting Christians under your administration. And what are you going to do about it? So I think to that extent that we can look at a Trump presidency as one that would protect human and civil rights, will promote moral values, especially in countries like in developing nations. I also think he will probably give more military support. That whole Super Tucano thing, it took quite a long time for it to manifest, but the discussion to provide military support to Nigeria to fight banditry and terrorism actually started from Trump. We asked Obama to do it, he refused. In fact, I think at the end of the day, for all the hoopla about Obama being a black man, he was the worst president for black Africa in terms of what he represented to us.
I don't know what you drink, but
yeah.
I owe you 2 bottles of it.
Yes.
I think that was the same conversation, that Trump allegedly described the president as lifeless in 2018, yeah.
Yes.
Quickly, let's talk about Kemi Badenoch. Badenoch. Oh, okay. And of course, there's been a bit of controversy with how she's addressed Nigeria, how she's described Nigeria, her roots, and what's the relevance of maybe expecting that she will have a different approach towards treating, Nigerians in diaspora or Nigeria generally as a leader of the Conservative Party? Should we be expecting anything from her?
Well, there are 2 schools of thought. There's one school of thought that says all the things she said were just a political strategy to get to win the leadership of the Conservative Party. That in many public appearances in the past, she has acknowledged her Nigerian heritage. She has appeared at Nigerian diaspora events. She's always basically promoted her Nigerian heritage. There's another school of thought that says she's disparaged her Nigerian heritage and that she basically has promoted her candidacy on the basis of the fact that she doesn't want the UK to become what she ran away from in Nigeria, and that's essentially what she's going to devote her tenure if she, both as a leader of the party and if she becomes the substantive prime minister down the road, she will work and labor to ensure that the UK doesn't become a country like Nigeria where you fear for your life, where infrastructure is dilapidated. She had a laundry list of issues that she claims she confronted in Nigeria during her time here. Well, my view about this is that you can't really choose where you're born. You're an accident of geography where you're born, but you can choose where you reside.
Yep.
You can choose where you settle. You can choose who you are loyal to, who you are patriotic to. Kemi has chosen to be British, even if she was born to Nigerian parents. She was born in the UK, spent some time in Nigeria, went back to the UK. She has made her choice to be a British citizen. She has sworn allegiance and loyalty to the British Constitution, the British flag, the monarchy. And that is what has taken her to where she is today. Now, I heard that MIDCOM, the Diaspora Commission, contacted her yesterday or tried to reach her and said she snubbed them. And I'm saying, well, first of all, what are you calling her for to begin with? I don't understand what you think you stand to gain, except for this our Nigerian way of saying...
It's our daughter. Our daughter is doing well in the UK.
Absolutely. But I'm not surprised she didn't respond because her loyalty is to the crown at this point in time. And she's speaking at this point for about half of the country, if not more than half of the country. And so I don't expect her to have divided loyalty at this point and be more or less giving an ode to her Nigerian-ness, which was the statement that the chairman of the Diaspora Commission said. We can't force anybody to be Nigerian,
we can't force her.
But we would hope she would embrace her Nigerian-ness. And I said, no, she's not trying to embrace her Nigerian-ness. She has jettisoned that because she cannot be a leader of a primary party in the UK and have any part of Nigerian-ness.
Same way that I felt. And I said it earlier, her focus right now is the British people.
Absolutely.
I feel like MIDCOM, if you want to send a congratulatory message.
Very good.
And let's go.
Yes.
Why are you calling her?
No, wrong.
To call our daughter.
Totally.
Our daughter is doing and that's a typical Nigerian thing. We tend to appreciate people more when they've gone abroad and become celebrated abroad. Let's try to start creating opportunities for our own to thrive. Let's start to celebrate them in here, not waiting for them to, quote-unquote, blow abroad before we start to see their value.
Exactly.
Okay. Let's come back to the papers. Dangote is still in the news again. He's in the news for, they said marketers sue Dangote, insist on petrol import on the Punch newspaper, the front page of the Punch. Initially, we heard about Dangote trying to sue to stop them from importing. They accused him of monopoly. It doesn't seem like his rest is anytime soon. As at yesterday too, and I'll be taking that much later, he was trending as well for those who were asking him to throw his support behind Peter Obi in 2027, the way that Elon Musk threw his support behind Donald Trump during the elections. But your thoughts on this Dangote brouhaha?
Well, first of all, just as an aside, no Nigerian businessman worth his salt will ever openly support a candidate because of the risk that if that candidate loses, he'll be out of favor. So they all sit on the fence or they support both candidates. They give money to this, give money to that. But to openly support one candidate in Nigeria is to risk complete
annihilation
of your business. Total.
Is it that Elon Musk has that much money that there's no way they can do without him? No. Or it's just that it's who Elon Musk is. He will throw his support behind who he will throw his support and damn the consequences.
No, it's that in America, the institutions are so strong that even if you back a candidate and that candidate loses, they can't do anything to you. They can't come and annihilate your business simply because you are not in favor with the current party in power. The institutions are too strong for that kind of thing to happen.
Yeah, I mean, there is the fear that institutions will be weaponized against you here.
Yes.
But over there, not so easily. And I think, let me also just say that I think that narrative which you just shared now is true, but I think that it is failing. In the last couple of years, we've also seen those things being weaponized against perceived enemies of America, or I mean, if you look at it even in the global scale itself, you see the International Criminal Court is weaponized against whoever it is that they don't want, or rather whoever it is that they want to punish. It's pretty much the same thing. And so I think Elon Musk had a genuine concern that this was do or die for him. If he didn't win this election, he said it repeatedly that he was going to be finished. They would have come for him and come for him hard. Well, yes, the institution would have protected him somehow, some way. The justice system would not let him be buried so easily, no doubt. But it doesn't mean that they wouldn't have tried or he wouldn't have been bruised.
Well, the way they would have gone after him probably would be things that would affect his business, things like tax cuts, things like regulations, things like permits. But to be open season on you as an individual in the way it can happen in Nigeria, that wouldn't have happened to Elon Musk. The Justice Department wouldn't have indicted him on charges for anything. See how they even tried to go and say the 1 million he was giving in the campaign, in the run-up. They took him to court about it, and the court ruled that he wasn't violating any election laws by doing that. So I think it would have been protected to some extent. That's not to say they wouldn't have found roundabout ways to seek to attack him. But going back to what Olive was asking in terms of Dangote, where we are now is that the independent marketers are saying it's cheaper for them to import than what Dangote is offering to sell their petrol at. And Dangote is saying that if you can buy it any cheaper than what I'm offering to sell it for, it must be substandard petrol. So there's this ongoing, continuing wrangle between Dangote and all the stakeholders in the petroleum industry. And I think NNPC sits right in the middle of that mess. And NNPC probably, we should put all the blame at NNPC's feet. I think it's a cesspit of corruption, incompetence, and I don't even understand why the leadership is still in place, because when NNPC was a government entity, the person who's the current leader was still the leader. When it became a private entity where it has a board of directors and it has corporate governance and we still have the same person that's still at the helm. I don't think that's correct. I think there should have been a fundamental shift in how it is being run once it became privatized. So I think until NNPC is broken up into pieces and restructured, I don't really see any sanitization of the oil sector per se.
Would you have expected, that with the controversy we've seen in the oil and gas sector with, Dangote, with the NNPC, we would have a National Assembly summon, that we would have, a proper conversation to understand exactly what is going on. It took a while before Dangote was even able to declare how much he was selling petrol. Independent marketers have been begging him to sell, petrol directly to them. NNPC initially had said that they were no longer middlemen, but that turned out to be a lie. So would you have expected the National Assembly, to see this as a burden enough to summon these people?
National Assembly is only interested in Bobrisky and very dark man. Sorry. National Assembly, they have oversight committees. They ask for jeeps so that they can go and do their oversight. But at the end of the day, they oversight trivialities. This is a crisis. It's a national crisis that affects every single Nigerian. They should have waited in ages ago. It shouldn't be at this point when the whole thing has now, spiraled out of control that we're now seeing if the National Assembly will intervene or not. But I think that clearly the bottom line for Nigerians is that we had anticipated that when Dangote refinery comes on stream and we can get locally refined petrol, our problems will be over. Yeah. We assumed that fuel prices would drop. Food prices would drop because of that, transportation prices. It'll have a knock-on effect. That was our assumption. Well, the opposite has happened. Since Dangote started refining his petrol, the price of petrol has gone up at least twice. Yeah. Right. So that whole notion of renewed hope is starting to get scary.
I think final one, as quickly as you can, the discos. They've raised meter prices by 28.3%. The national grid has collapsed for the 10th time. We don't know how many more times it will collapse for before 2024 ends. What are your thoughts on the power sector?
Power sector is just as bad as the oil and gas sector, is just as bad as the security sector. Bottom line is, I don't even think we should be paying for meters to begin with because we don't own them. They're owned by the National Electricity Regulatory Commission. I don't see why consumers should be the ones to pay. But it's a scam because what they do is they have a free program, the IMAP, where you can sign up for it and get it for free. But it takes you 10 months to 2 years to get it under the free program. And during that time, you're on estimated billing where they're giving you astronomical bills. So everybody's too scared of us. So you will go down the route of pay for it and get it next week. So at the end of the day, it's just still all a scam to find a way to extort money from Nigerians. But we don't even mind paying. If we get power, we don't mind paying the higher tariff. We don't mind paying for the meter. But we need to have uninterrupted power supply, which we are not getting. So it's a double negative at the moment.
Quickly to speak on this, we were starved and locked up with criminals, and that's the minors who the president has now asked that they be released, after, of course, the story went viral a couple of days ago.
Yes. Well, I wouldn't have expected any different treatment for them once they were arrested as having committed a crime. Then they would normally go through the custodial process, which means being locked up in general population, being fed 1 meal of beans with insects a day or whatever it is they feed them in prison. So there would have been no preferential treatment because remember, the idea of them being minors came out after the fact. So when they were apprehended, when they were detained, at that point in time, they were common criminals and they would have been treated as such. So that part of the story, I don't see anything unconscionable or wrong about that aspect. Of course, the entire arrest, first of all, of protesters who are protesting bad governance. The fact that they were arrested at all was wrong. Then to compound it by the fact that some of them were now underage makes it all the more terrible. But glad the presidency weighed in on it. I was a bit worried about the way he did it because he was already going through a judicial process. The judge had given them bail. You know.
And do you agree with the bill that the judge gave?
He gave the honorable 500,000
in comparison
to the boatman, and he gave 10 million to wretched, poor street kids who can't even afford a meal. So, but you weigh the charges, and some are charged with treason, which under normal circumstances, if it's real treason, it's not bailable. It's not bailable. It's not bailable if it's real. But you look at those kids and you know that those ones were not trying to
even if they were waving flags.
Isn't that something that, you know, you would expect the judge to be able to, have his own discernment and say, or think otherwise?
The judge.
I mean, what I'm pointing out here is, it's just a huge flaw in our criminal justice system, and the people who run that system.
How independent is the judge? If the attorney general or somebody or the chief of staff of the president calls the judge and says, we want to deal with these people, he will kowtow to what his paymasters say. The judge is not as independent as we would like him to be. So that's why you see these wide disparities. 500,000 for somebody who can afford 10 million and 10 million for somebody who can't even afford 100,000. Those disparities are there because justice in Nigeria is still a work in progress. The practice of jurisprudence in Nigeria doesn't guarantee a fair or even a true outcome. Remember, the whole purpose of justice is a search for the truth. Anytime you are brought up on charges for anything, there is a process that seeks to determine what actually happened and apportion blame or approbation to the right parties. So if the processes along the way are already compromised, that search for the truth becomes made rubbish of. So, yeah.
Even just going back to how the charge sheet was even drawn.
Absolutely.
Who actually charged those children for treason? The police that arrested them and threw them into the same prison with adults.
And the Inspector General is saying he wants to do an investigation. I'm asking myself, is it possible?
Can the police investigate itself?
First of all, can the police investigate? Secondly, is it possible that the Inspector General didn't even know or wasn't the one who even gave the order for those people who are out there protesting to be arrested and locked up?
Police have denied the maltreatment of these protesters, according to the reports on the papers, but it's not a good look. Again, I don't really have faith that anything will come out of whatever investigation they're instituting. Probably. It's just going to, I think it's just to calm the nerves of Nigerians for now, and then we'll move on to other things.
Absolutely.
All right. Dayo Akintobi, thank you very much for joining us. We wish Kemi
Badenoch
and President Donald Trump the very best. We, of course, hope that Nigerians or, of course, everyone in diaspora gets to benefit somehow, some way from their time in office. Good luck to both of them. And also rest in peace to the, now late Chief of Army Staff, Taoreed Lagbaja. He was at 56. I remember that there was some controversy a couple of weeks ago when someone had said that he had passed, and the Nigerian Army had said that it was fake news. But eventually then, so rest in peace to him. Our hearts and thoughts, prayers go out to his family and to the rest of the Nigerian Army. Thank you very much for coming around.
Thank you.
My pleasure always.
All right. Stay with us. You've heard what Dayo Akintobi has to say. Very fine analysis on these stories, including, of course, the election of Donald Trump and, of course, stories back here. But let's share with you what Nigerians now are saying on major issues here in Nigeria. Stay with us.
As the U.S. gears up for another 4 years of Trump, Nigerians have been quick to draw parallels between the political drama in the States and their own experiences back home. There's been a lot of chatter comparing the U.S. elections to Nigeria's recent presidential race, from the speed with which the results have been counted and to what some would refer as a relatively free and fair election. What's really actually interesting in all this is the comparison between Donald Trump and Nigerian presidential candidate Peter Obi. But this will not be the first time. Recall how that the senior special assistant on media and publicity to President Bola Tinubu, Temitope Ajayi, after a heated U.S. presidential debate, made similar comparison, howbeit for different reasons. In a post on X, he said, and I quote, Peter Obi is a Nigerian version of Donald Trump. Like Obi, Trump will use the most negative epithets imaginable to describe a country he wants to lead again, just to make a point and rile up his base. Away from this, let's take a look at why a fresh comparison has been sparked after the announcement of a Donald Trump presidency. Now, seeing how Elon Musk fiercely and openly supported Donald Trump through campaigns up until victory, Nigerian billionaires like Aliko Dangote and Tony Elumelu are being thrown into the mix as the unofficial Peter Obi backers of the 2027 elections. Could these Nigerian moguls be the ones to propel Nigeria's Obi ambitions forward in 2027? Well, ex-users seem to think so. Now, here's the thing. For many Nigerians, this is not just about comparing politicians, it's mainly about the need for a change in an upward trajectory for the country and a reshaping of the future of Nigeria. Is it the political establishment, the outsiders, or is it the moguls who pull the strings behind the scenes? One thing's for sure, Nigerians always have something to say about this issue. And we'll start off with a tweet of Blossom Martins, who says, can Tony Elumelu campaign for Peter Obi the same way that Elon campaigned for Trump? For the love of country, can he? The answer is hell no. Your Nigerian billionaires are all selfish. They only know about themselves. They don't care about your country. They don't love you. I'd like my producers to please put it directly on the screen. Let's have Engineer Shaibu. Engineer Shaibu also shared a tweet. Engineer Shaibu says, Elon Musk better be ready to also support Peter Obi in 2027. What he did for Trump is unprecedented. Celebrity Taylor also had a reaction to this, and in the tweet, Celebrity Taylor said, what Elon Musk did with Trump was what the likes of Otedola, Dangote, and Adelekes could have done with Peter Obi, but they chose suffering and smiling with a touch of hypocrisy. We have a next tweet that says, Peter Obi must adopt President Donald Trump's strategy for 2027 election. You must match them energy. You can't defeat APC if you don't invest in media. You can't. And the next tweet from Chico B. Emmanuel says, Nigerian government thought Donald Trump will not win the election, and they used him to mock Peter Obi, depicting failure for Trump. Now, Trump has won the U.S. election, and there is a quietness in the presidential villa in Nigeria. President Donald Trump should look into this issue. Wow, I would think he had more pressing issues. I'm enjoying the way Trump and Kamala are going at each other. No gentleman in politics. Peter Obi should jump things down in preparation for 2027. No award for the most peaceful candidate, High Chief Lawrence says. And we have another tweet from Tochi Adesonya. Tochi Adesonya says, Trump did like Peter Obi, talking directly to the people about his plans. Harris did like Tinubu, pre-recorded all her interviews with help of editing. Really? Unfortunately, Harris did not have Yakubu to perfect the result. Yeah, shade. Odogu Zeji says, you hold Peter Obi to high moral standards, but when it comes to Trump, you say you don't care about his morals. Like your children will not watch this man lead the biggest democracy on earth while insulting, denigrating, and objectifying women in public. You think it won't have any effect on them? Shame on #obedience for Trump. Well, that's another angry tweet by Odogu Zeji. Now, share with us, do you agree with these thought processes? On a much lighter note, Dangote has been in the news a lot lately. Some Nigerians argue that he has spoken to the media in the past few months more than he has ever spoken in his career. From NNPC versus Dangote versus Ipman and Petron, Wahala. Now, you will have brought his name into 2027 politics. He's probably saying to himself, let the rich breathe. That's all we have on what Nigerians are saying today. We'll be right back into the studio with more conversations this morning on Breakfast Central.
Well, thank you very much, Olive, for what Nigerians are saying. Pretty interesting views there in comparing the United States elections and the Nigerian elections and the key players here and there. But back here in Nigeria, Nigeria's national power grid collapsed again on Tuesday, marking the 8th grid collapse this year and the first in November. Doesn't seem like it will be the last. The federal government, through the National Orientation Agency, has attributed the frequent collapse of the national grid, which results in nationwide blackouts, to the inability of electricity distribution companies, the DISCOs, to take power that has been generated. In a circular release on Wednesday, the NOA explained that the country can generate about 13,000 megawatts of electricity, as well as transmit about 8,000. But given DISCO's limited infrastructure, this will result in system failure. The agency said that in October, the DISCOs rejected about 1,400 megawatts of the 5,313 megawatts of electricity that was generated by the generation companies.
Meanwhile, electricity distribution companies, DISCOs, have announced revised prices for various electricity meter models, marking the second price hike in 4 months. According to the DISCOs, the cost of a single-phase meter has risen from approximately 117,000 naira to as much as 149,000 naira 800, depending on the distribution company and meter vendor. Not a good look. The electricity sector has been thoroughly affected and impacted in 2024. I do not recall which year we have had it as bad as we have this year, not just because Nigerians have been classified into bands when we're looking at the power sector, but even those who are allegedly in band A are starting to complain that they're paying exorbitant prices and fees for power and not getting it. So I don't know what the Minister of Power is going to do at this point to resuscitate the energy sector. The Ministry of Power is not looking good. It's been failing, which is why Nigerians were wondering why he was still left in office at the time that the firing and reshuffling of the cabinet was happening. But we'll keep talking about this, and if we get any more updates regarding the power sector, we hope that we definitely will communicate that to you. But it would seem that when in the Holy Book, the Creator said, "Let there be light," Nigeria was not really getting the memo.
Yeah, but it's, I mean, people might be happy that the Minister of Power, of course, has summoned them to try to understand
what the issues
are. But I don't even know that anybody should be comforted by that, because this is someone that should have happened
Someone that's
immediately.
Happening in which time?
He got into office. And I believe that they have had, subsequent meetings, no doubt. But it just doesn't in any way show, give me any reason to be confident in his abilities as minister. If 17 months after inauguration and after he's been named as minister, we're seeing these back-to-back national grid collapses, and then you're once again summoning them. So it means that all this while, you've not really been aware of the issues in the power sector enough, for you to make, proper judgment and know exactly what steps need to be taken. I mean, and again, I want to believe that this is really just a meeting that was had, like they, have had regular meetings. There's nothing necessarily special about this one. But if it is summoning them to explain and to deliberate on the national grid collapses, it means that, if, I don't know, I don't just have a lot of confidence when I see these things. I don't read these stories and say, oh, the minister is working, because it is embarrassing. And for the longest time, I've spoken about the infrastructure deficit that exists in the DISCOs and in the generation companies, the transmission companies as well. The DISCOs have also complained about that infrastructure deficit, as the reason they are not able to distribute as much as possible to the Nigerian consumer. Remember that there's also a large percentage of Nigerians that are still in estimated billing. It's just too much, too many of these angles. We need to go. Thank you very much for staying with us all through Thursday morning's edition of Breakfast Central. And of course, we'll be back here again tomorrow morning to give you the final edition for this week. I am Osaogie Ogbon.
I am Olive MOD. See you tomorrow.